building the next generation of Rainmakers in your firm. If you desire a successful succession transition, you can never start too soon. And having the right coaching and mentoring philosophy pouring into your next gen will make or break your future. Hello and welcome to the Rare Advisor. I've got a good friend joining me today, Mr. Bill Lacasse from SRG Financial, SRG Financial Advisors, I should say. And I was honored to be at an event that he had recently, which marked a segue in a transition point within his business. And I'd love to talk to him about that today. There was a lot going on. We've got a lot of information to get into, and I'm sure, Bill, that knowing the two of us, we're going to find plenty to talk about, and we may need to even extend this into an extra video or two, because you went through a really cool strategy, I guess, for lack of a better word, of how to handle this stage of the business. Maybe if you could just start to explain basically what it is you were trying to do, and then I'll kind of take us in a few different directions in terms of how you were pulling all that together.
Sure. Well, I have a son that had always been hoping that he would one day kind of fill my shoes. And so we've always kind of had in the back of our mind this idea of how do we make this transition? So over the last year or so, I have been including him in on all of my meetings and that type of stuff so that the clients already knew who he was always already very familiar with Christopher, but kind of got them used to seeing Christopher in the meetings. Had always encouraged him to, participate, ask some questions, do some things like that inside of the meetings. But the kind of, for me, the great unknown was, can Christopher carry the ball by himself? Right. What happens if we put him in front of a large group of people? That has always been kind of my role and has always been kind of my domain. And I have to honestly say that what I was always afraid of is that I overtalk, which caused Christopher to undertalk.
Yeah.
And Christopher was always the quiet one sitting there. So, we were trying to figure out how in the world do we get Christopher in front of a group of people that's meaningful, that could solve a number of different answers or give us some answers to some of the questions that we've been carrying. And we started working with Steve Phillips and talking. He called me out of the clear blue one day and said, Bill, I know you're wanting to transition. I know you're wanting to make some changes in your practice as far as to how much you work, how long you want to work. If it was a year from now, what could I have done to have made that transition easier for you? And I thought, and it just kind of popped off the top of my head, I said, if you could teach my son to be able to give a really good seminar or be able to speak in front of people where I'm comfortable with that would help immensely. And so that started the conversation as to what it was we were going to do. And actually, to be honest with you, Christopher went up to Steve's office in Kansas City.
So just to interject real quick, he's referring to Steve Phillips, who heads up our coaching group, which is known as USA Financial Protocol. So go ahead.
Correct. Correct. Yes, no problem. We're fortunate in that we're only, about 3 hours away from Kansas City, so a drive up there was very feasible. And so I thought, just for kind of the ease of making this happen, that I would go with Christopher up there the first time and then basically throw him to the wolves and see what Steve would come up with. And while we were driving up there, I got to thinking about one of my mentors in the business that, bless his heart, he had worked in the industry for 50 years. And on his 50th anniversary of being in the business, he made the decision that he was going to have a big party where he invited all of his clients and kind of set it up as a "this is your life" kind of arrangement. And I remember going to that. I remember being very touched and very moved by everything that was said, by everything that was done that evening. And it had kind of popped in my head, well, gosh, I don't know that I'm going to make 50 years in the business. I've been in the business a little over 30, but I never really thought, I didn't want to wait on this transition for another 20 years. So I thought, you're about to have a 65th birthday party. So this had kind of formulated in my head as we were driving up there. And so when we sat down with Steve and his team, the conversation came up as to, well, what do you want us to do? What seminar? What are you thinking? And so I just kind of threw off the top of my head the idea about us having a big event, being my 65th birthday party, and using that as a platform to give Christopher the ability to be the kind of the MC host, to make a presentation about his pop, about what we were doing, about what was going on, all those different things. And Steve and the team, as soon as I said that, it was like, yeah, that's perfect. That, the light went on, and I was done from that point forward. I didn't have any more input on what it is what they were cooking up or what they were doing at that point, because they worked with Christopher. He probably went up there, 2 or 3 more times in person, had, I don't know how many phone calls, how many different team meetings online, different things like that. But they basically put together this 65th birthday party. We did it as kind of a for fun roast, where we had some of our clients come up and tell some stories. As a matter of fact, you got to come up and tell a pretty good story. I have that on tape if you ever would like to share that with everyone. It's a funny one. Mike did a great job. It was absolutely awesome. But it ended up being just a wonderful platform for Christopher to be able to present himself.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing to me is that I knew he would do a good job, but I don't want to sound like proud papa here, but I am. Yeah. He hit a home run that evening. I mean, he not only did he do a good job, he did I don't know what he would have done better. And I know a lot of it had to do with Steve and some of the coaching that he gave him up there.
Definitely. And actually, so that's where I'd like to dive a little deeper real quickly, because the first part of all of this is you had to coach up Christopher so that he could be the next Rainmaker in your practice. Mm-hmm. And so in doing that, as you pointed out already, it's kind of difficult when you're working with your dad, and your dad's already a high quality, top-notch Rainmaker, and you're kind of in his shadow in the practice. And so that was the first step, was having to get him elevated. So Christopher, like where would you say Christopher was on that scale before you began this entire process?
We're talking a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah. So being able to like you said, stand at a seminar, be the Rainmaker for the practice, kind of come out from underneath your shadow.
I must say a 3 or 4.
Okay.
And part of it was apprehension on his part, apprehension on my part. I grew up in my father's business, completely different business than what we're doing today. But everybody had kind of always made the assumption that I would take over Dad's business.
Right.
Well, his business ideas and my business ideas were 180 degrees apart. And I did not want to fight that battle. So I moved on to go do something entirely different, and worked out very well for my dad. I'm glad that it did. Worked out very well for me. I'm glad that I made that transition. But I knew that I did not want to have the feelings between Christopher and I that my father and I were having. And I've got to tell you, that was one of the things that in that coaching that Steve, that's all the protocol guys, all the work that they did with Christopher, some of the questions that they asked both of us, they were questions that I could not have asked Christopher, because it would have been very antagonistic for me to ask those questions. And questions they asked, the back and forth, it just kind of opened up a dialogue that neither one of us would have been able to have had if we'd have tried to have done it on our own. And I found that to be incredibly valuable because, we answered questions along the lines of, okay, if we continue with this trend, because our transition, we still have got another 5 years that I'm going to be working with Christopher before he becomes the head guy. And that is what I outlined that in my speech the night of the party. Christopher outlined that in his speech the night of the party. But they ask us questions like, for example, okay, we get 5 years down the road, Bill, and you decide I'm not giving up power.
Right.
How are you going to feel about that, Christopher? And, what would be the ramifications of you doing that? And then they also ask him the same questions of like, okay, we get 5 years down the road, your dad's counting on you to take this over. What in the world might derail you from this so that if you got to that point that you said, no, I'm not going to do this, I'm moving on to something else. Now, those two areas right there are some of the most important things whenever you start talking about transitioning to anybody.
Sure.
How do you approach that and how do you broach that? Well, Christopher, he gave, it caused him to think about that, caused me to think about that. And fortunately, we were able to come up with answers that we were both very comfortable with.
Yeah.
And, that was kind of the launching pad for really getting this started.
Yeah, and also I would add to that, just having known both of you for so long, is Christopher has although he shares some of your tendencies, he also shares many from his mother. So he has different tendencies than you do in terms of how he would handle himself in front of a crowd or in an advisor client type relationship. And so how did you go about bringing that out of him? Did that happen inside your practice at all? Did that happen over with the protocol team? Like, how did you start getting him developed in that manner?
Well, that is something that is still an ongoing project because at this point, Christopher's not ready to just step into my shoes and I'm not ready to step out of my shoes.
Okay.
Before you and I even started this conversation, we had a conversation a little bit about the idea of what it's like to just say, will you ever quit? I don't know that I will ever quit. But, what we're doing now is I am now spending less time in the office and have prepared all of my clients with the idea that to get to me, they're going to have to talk to Christopher. That their first point of contact needs to be Christopher, that he will take what it is that they need to have happen. He will always know where I'm at, so he can call me and we can take care of that. But what comes out of that is the ability for Christopher to say, oh, I know the answer to that, or I know what Pop would say, or I know, here's what we need to do. And so he's already derailing some of the things that would cause me to have extra work in the course of the day. Another attitude that's kind of been instilled in him, and this has happened, just in the last 6 or 8 months. He walks into my office every morning and says, what's on your plate? What is it that you have to do today? And he just blatantly says, let me do that. Or why don't you give me that? And so we kind of divide up some of the things that I'm doing, which I love that. I mean, I don't want to be the guy to go just always walk into Christopher and unload and say, yep, I'm getting lazy, son. So you're going to have to take on more of this stuff. He's giving me the excuse to be able to take some time off. And that has worked very, very well. Right. Once again, this transition, we're trying to make it to where we're getting to the point where I want all of my old clients to feel comfortable with asking Christopher those questions.
Sure.
And so far, it's working very well. We're not having any issues with that at all.
So so basically you've adapted or changed your appointment process based on this. You've changed a lot of your internal servicing processes, and probably just the average, the everyday systems that you use in your business have now changed because of this. So Christopher, as he's getting elevated, you're finding out areas that he excels in, and he's starting to take those things off of your plate. And that's allowing you to focus on the things that really you want to focus on. It's also giving you the freedom to start to slow down a bit.
That's correct.
So the transition for you guys is well underway now, and the starting point of that, I guess, was spending some extra time with Christopher, making sure he really did want to take over from you
Right.
in the future and fill your shoes eventually, and then getting him to both to understand, and both of you, I guess, to understand really that there's a roadmap to get there, and it's going to take a little bit of time. So you're not rushing into it, which is, I think, very smart because you don't want to screw anything up with your clients or your business along the way. So you've been taking your time in that manner, and as you pointed out, you basically now have defined a 5-year period of time for this transition to ultimately take place. And in the meantime, you're slowly picking up more freedoms, and Christopher is slowly picking up more responsibility within the practice. Is that all a pretty
You're
good way to
spot,
sum that up?
you're spot on with everything you just said there. Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. Good.
As most advisors know, the questions that you get from your client are usually things that you're not going to deal with anyway. You're going to redirect them someplace else. Well, it's very easy to say, oh, for Christopher, when somebody says, well, what I wanted your dad for was, and it might be a service item. Well, let me just go ahead and direct you over to the service people. We'll get that taken care of. I'll sure tell Pop that you called. Is there anything else that you'd like to have? Usually that takes care of. No, that's it. That's all I really needed. Bingo, bango. That situation is done. I'm fine with that.
The other thing you've got built in now is so often clients will be concerned or at least ask the question, what happens to me if something happens to you first?
Absolutely.
And so now you've got that answer.
The crazy thing is that I really started getting those questions 10 years ago. Everybody started, saying, okay, how long are you going to do this, Bill? Or what, are you going to leave me high and dry one of these days? And I didn't know how to answer it 10 years ago. We do not have that question anymore at all. Everybody knows and everybody understands. And everybody's especially when I explain to them this transition process of where Christopher has come. I mean, to kind of encapsulate for everybody that doesn't know Christopher, as soon as Christopher got out of high school and went off to college, the first thing that we did was we had him do all of our data input. That was a way for him to make a little extra money. He could do that from any place, wherever he was at. Didn't matter. He just got online and made those things happen. It made him very familiar with every client and every case, and which was now that I look back, we did that by accident, but it was one of the most invaluable things in the world. He can tell me things about my clients' portfolios that I used to want to remember that now I work real hard to not remember. And he can tell me all the inside of what's going on in everybody's account. It also, after he got out of college, then we put him in charge of operations. And what I mean by that is we made him run the business from the backside. We put him in the back of the house. He paid all the bills. He did all the, it's a nice thing when you have kind of a close-knit family like we have. I've always jokingly said, if you want to know how much money I've got, ask Christopher. He knows. I have no idea. But he runs the checkbook, pays all the bills, and did all of those kinds of things. So he's gotten very intimate with what it takes to physically run the business from a management side of the business only. So it's just been like the last 18 months that we have been transitioning Christopher over to the front of the house, where he's now seeing clients as they walk through the door, greeting them when they come in, coming to get me. I mean, that's another thing that, it's subtle, but I think it's important. He's meeting the people in the front of as they're coming through the door, and then he comes and gets Pop.
Good.
And it's been a nice little, with all the things that he has done now inside of the business, he's familiar with the only thing he's not familiar with is the service side. We've never had him really in a position to do service, but I think we're fortunate enough that I don't think he's probably ever going to have to do that. I think we're going to always have somebody in that service department that will take care of that. So, I mean, not to say that he couldn't service something if it popped up, but that has not been one of his roles. Yeah. Other than that, he's going to have touched everything in the building.
Good. Well, and on top of all that, I know that for a fact that you guys had a super powerful 2020, which not a lot of people can lay claim to that. So congratulations to you. And if it's all right, Bill, I'd like to ask you to come back for one more talk here where we can get into that transitional event and the event you actually did. You call it your birthday, but it was a lot more than your birthday. Do you have a few minutes? We can reconvene on that? Great.
Absolutely.
Well, so thank you to Bill Lacasse. This is the Rare Advisor. Please like, please subscribe, and I would really encourage you to catch the next video because we're going to dive into the transitional event that Bill ran with his team to make all this happen. So thank you, everyone. We'll be back again soon.